Good morning, and welcome to the Mission Critical Climate and Security Game Jam, hosted by the Archipelago of Design in collaboration with Casco, the NATO-affiliated Climate Change and Security Center of Excellence based in Montreal. So who am I? My name is Oliver Jones. I am the host for the online version of the Game Jam. I have a PhD in English. My work was on war studies and contemporary literature. I also teach at Canadian Forces College, where I've been teaching for the last 3 years in the National Security Program. I have a background with design workshops and facilitation for the Canadian Armed Forces, the RCAF, Canadian Forces College, among a handful of others. And I've also been involved in a number of game design initiatives with the Archipelago of Design. I was the creative director of the most recent rendition of Breakthrough, Shadows of Byzantium, and I was the narrative designer of both Project Inner Alliance, our newest climate and security game, and Breakthrough Arctic Albatross. So the purpose of this video today is to walk you through a 4-step game design process. The end goal at the end of these 4 steps is for you to create a 10-minute pitch for a transformative game concept which your team has developed. Part 1, what we're doing today, will introduce you to gaming and we'll task you with choosing a transformative learning goal and developing a scenario that can achieve that goal. In part 2, I'm going to talk you through how to prototype game mechanics. And in part 3, I'm going to talk about how to develop a game artifact, like a game map or a character sheet or a deck of cards, and how to tell your game's story. And in part 4, I'm going to give you some short advice on refining your pitch and your game concept. So this online climate security game jam is running parallel to an in-person game jam event happening at the War Museum in Ottawa over June 17th and 18th. The goal of both of these climate game jams is to explore how games can help defense professionals anticipate and adapt to climate-related operational challenges. That includes examining how climate disruptions are reshaping military readiness and logistics, and how to build anticipatory thinking into military planning to support sustainable, agile defense operations across NATO partners. All teams, including the online one, will be presenting their game concept during the online pitch session on June 26th at 9 a.m. And I will be sending a link for that in the next few days. So who are we? The Archipelago of Design is a nonprofit organization supporting the leading independent network, purpose-driven security practitioners, educators, and researchers. Our mission is to empower leaders to shift mindsets to drive the evolution of national security organizations across NATO members and partners. AOD's core mission is to foster transformative change in defense security and related sectors by applying design thinking, systems thinking, and creativity to complex problems. So when AOD refers to transformative culture change or cultural evolution, we mean intentional and deep-rooted shifts in organizational values, behaviors, and mindsets. And these shifts are aimed at fostering inclusivity, adaptability, and collaboration. AOD aims to foster innovations that challenge traditional methods, enabling organizations to better adapt to modern security environments. These kind of transformations go beyond surface level changes and seek to fundamentally reshape how people within an organization interact, make decisions, and approach challenges. And the intent in empowering transformational leadership of this kind is ultimately to enable more resilient and forward-thinking defense and security organizations. And a big part of AOD's work is in exploring how the combination of games and design methodologies can influence professionals' behavior, drive organizational transformation, and prepare leaders and their teams for complex challenges. And that's what we're asking your team to tap into for this game challenge. A big part of AOD's work is in exploring how the combination of games and design methodologies can influence professionals' behavior. And that includes, again, driving organizational transformation and preparing leaders and their teams. So, part 1, Today we're going to give you an introduction to gaming, transformative gaming, and we're going to task you with choosing a transformative goal for your game and a scenario that can realize that transformative goal. So the goal for today, for part one, is that your team will have at the end of this exercise decided on the transformative learning goal and game scenario for their game pitch. So what we'll cover in this part of the video, we'll go through a kind of crash course in transformative game design. We will briefly review a climate change game and the Game Jam Challenge, and we'll go over how to choose a transformative goal and how to develop a scenario with your team, and we'll provide some prompting for you to work through that. So transformative game design 101. Why use games for climate change? The simple idea motivating this game jam is that games are a powerful medium for learning. And they're a powerful medium for learning because they can draw players into different ways of thinking. The experience of gaming can be transformational because games allow us to step into unfamiliar worlds or scenarios. And that experience can suspend players' disbelief and tap into new ways of understanding themselves and their relationship to the world. By immersing ourselves in those experiences, we can develop insight into our own thinking and behavior. When players feel the tension in a narrative, when they reckon with the trade-offs in gameplay and strategy, and when they feel the urgency of making decisions, they're more open to rethinking assumptions and behaviors. And a transformative game like the kind you are developing should make an effort to tap into those kinds of experiences. It's important to stress at this point that we are not building full games here. This workshop is about creating a game concept that captures a transformational idea. And the process of designing that game concept is part of the learning. As you decide what players will experience, what kind of dilemmas they'll face, how the story unfolds, you're also thinking critically about climate security, systemic change, and what needs to shift in the real world for organizations to be able to confront these challenges. The premise of this workshop is that we need transformative games that address the relationship between climate change and security, because climate change is often treated as an afterthought in mission planning. It's treated like a background issue rather than a driving force. But the impacts of climate change are already reshaping how, where, and why operations unfold in the real world. At the same time, both climate change and security are topics that provoke a lot of skepticism and resistance because of the implied trade-offs and worldviews that are at stake in these issues. The advantage of approaching these topics through a game is that an engaging game format with subtle messaging in which lessons are learned experientially rather than they're instructed didactically is more likely to make an impression on a skeptical audience and perhaps encourage them to consider other perspectives on different difficult topics and questions. So broadly speaking, games can be a medium for learning. That can happen through gameplay, yes, but what we're doing this week is using the game design process to tap into new ways of thinking about defense transformation. And because Casco's mission is to advance collective learning around climate and security, this is what the ultimate goal of this project is about. And you will be developing prototypes of a climate and security game that realizes this goal. You can think of this as your chance to build something imaginative, persuasive, and tangible. Not a complete game, but a prototype. So why do we do things this way? We'll be following a very compressed design thinking model to develop and iterate these game prototypes. And that means a lot of the work we'll be doing in this workshop is about problem framing. So what is problem framing, you're asking? Problem framing is an approach to complex problem solving that encourages us to deeply understand a given challenge before jumping into finding solutions. And this is crucial for serious or educational games. The idea with problem framing is that in order to understand complex problems, it's helpful to take the time to explore the conditions that allow a problem to arise and persist. Slowing down to explore the systemic depth of a problem enables an organization tasked with solving that problem to understand how the systems involved can create complex dynamics. These complex dynamics may frustrate efforts to impose solutions and may even make underlying problems worse. Climate change and its complex relationship to security is arguably one of these kinds of complex problems, or perhaps even multiple. The parts of this workshop that are about identifying a transformational learning goal and a game scenario that is suited to exploring that learning goal are arguably about problem framing. Later in this series, we're going to do some testing and iterating, which is the second half of this diagram here. So why do we test and iterate? Prototyping is about testing proposed solutions to the problem we framed in the early parts of this workshop. The principle for prototyping and testing is this. It's simple. Fail fast, learn faster. Prototypes allow us to test ideas early and cheaply, catching flaws before too much time or resources are invested in the concept or the deliverable. Testing also lets us collect user feedback. Iteration helps us integrate real user reactions to improve gameplay, balance, clarity, and engagement. And it leads to better outcomes. A tested project is more likely to be meaningful, fun, and aligned with player and learning goals. It may be a challenge for the online group, admittedly, to undertake rigorous testing of your game concept because you're working asynchronously. However, you will have an opportunity to receive some substantive feedback from our online coach, Adam Clare, who's a seasoned game designer who we've worked with for a number of years now. If you don't find you have many opportunities as an online team to coordinate a test for your game concept prototype, Adam will still be able to give you sound advice about how you might adapt your existing prototype to realize an engaging game experience that can achieve your transformational goals. So if you're here, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess you've had some exposure to game before, be they video games, tabletop games, war games, whatever. I would also guess that some of you may have some exposure to serious games. You've maybe played procedural games that simulate decision-making in an organizational for educational purposes. War games usually fit the bill for this kind of game experience as well, like formal war games. But there are other kinds of serious games to simulate, I should say, organizational decision-making under conditions of crisis. Transformative games, which is what we're building today, takes the concept of serious games one step further. A transformative game has an ambitious intention to change how players think, feel, or behave, often pushing beyond what seems currently possible or thinkable from an organizational perspective. A transformative game doesn't teach players what to think. It transforms how they understand the systems, trade-offs, and value systems involved. And that's the kind of game that we're asking you to come up with in this workshop. So over the last few years of researching and developing games, we, being the Archipelago of Design, have found that games work best when they don't take reality too seriously. Unlike detailed simulations, which can often feel rigid or overly scripted. Imaginative games that invite players to be more playful and more curious are more likely to lower people's defenses and enable them to embrace ideas that they might not otherwise entertain. When players are immersed in gameplay, when they're having fun, they tend to let their guard down, and that makes them more open to new ideas, perspectives, and even difficult topics. And that's why these types of games are so powerful for transformational learning. They invite players' curiosity instead of their resistance. You can think about it this way. A well-developed transformative game will be able to subtly influence a player who might be skeptical or resistant to the message that that game is trying to get across. By grounding the players' learning in an immersive experience where they feel the stakes of the choices and issues involved, A transformative game is able to communicate a message to that player in the way more didactic forms of academic and professional instruction may not be able to. So for transformative games to work, they tend to use the principle of stealth learning. In other design thinking contexts, there's a similar practice that is sometimes called Trojan horsing, which means disguising the tool or the method so that it's more likely to be accepted by the intended audience. And sometimes I'll be switching back and forth using those terms interchangeably, stealth learning and Trojan horsing. And we're doing something similar here today. The idea with stealth learning is that the intended lesson that your game is trying to convey isn't front and center of the gaming experience. Instead of telling players upfront what they will learn, we're trying to embed the message into the gameplay. And player learning then happens through their experience with the game world and the game mechanics. For that to work, the game needs to help players suspend disbelief, which means that realism is not always the best approach to game design. Immersive, imaginative worlds help players let go of real-world biases and engage more openly. What matters more than realism is player immersion. When the story and mechanics feel immersive, players are drawn into the experience and are more likely to reflect deeply on it. And this stealth learning approach tends to increase player receptivity to the learning goals. Without overt messaging, players tend to be less defensive and they're more open to transformation of their own thinking through gameplay. So I'm going to give you an example of one of AOD's own games to illustrate what a game concept looks like. And that is a game that is called Project Inner Alliance, or just Inner Alliance for short, which is now currently in pre-production. That project was led by my colleague Cassie Medema, and I was the narrative designer for that project and a playtester alongside a handful of other assorted roles. So Inner Alliance is set in the year 2040, somewhere in North America, although we aren't totally explicit about that. And it is a squad-based tactical role-playing game, not unlike the tabletop game Gloomhaven or the video game XCOM, where the players assume control of members of a climate security task force. The game is set after the Third World War, in a future where climate change is on track for the worst-case scenario, causing severe flooding. The player's task is to cooperate to use their squad's unique abilities to rescue civilians that have become stranded or injured because of the flooding. The game is not directly about climate change, although it uses a climate change setting. This game is designed to transform player behaviors related to team belonging and gender-responsive leadership. The scenario of this game emphasizes extreme weather induced by climate change. In other words, it describes a plausible future, but the scenario is also very different from the world we currently live in, even if it does map out from current trends. That rescue scenario, where you rescue civilians as a team, is a Trojan horse we built to unite a team of players in a common task and purpose. And we tune the scenario and the game mechanics to encourage them to reflect on intersectional dynamics in security organizations, particularly at team levels, and to sort of foreground challenging issues related to human security and women, peace, and security. You'll notice that this description I just gave you doesn't spell out much more than a concept for a game. We have a transformational goal here. We're encouraging players to reflect deeply on how intersectional considerations can impact human security and the priorities of security organizations. We have a scenario. We have a region that is racked by climate-induced extreme weather, in which players are tasked with rescuing civilians in peril while risking civil trust and team cohesion. And we have a set of game mechanics that force players to reckon with trade-offs through limited choices. And that is, again, it's a squad-based tactics in a role-playing format. matched with a branching narrative with different outcomes depending on the player's decisions. And that kind of brief summation is what we're hoping your game concept at the end of today will be able to articulate. And you'll spend some time refining that concept over the following workshops. So ultimately, what you're working towards developing in this workshop is a game concept like the one I just laid out. And by game concept, I simply mean a compelling articulation of a set of ideas for a game that could eventually be developed into a fully fledged game. Once again, I stress your team is not building a complete game today. Rather, you are working towards a description of a game concept. And down the line, and a few game mechanics and possibly game artifacts that you can prototype and refine through some feedback with your design codes. And the idea is that this game concept would be transformational for education around the nexus of climate and security change. I stress this is a relatively low fidelity process, which is why I've included this sort of clumsy image of a Lego game artifact. What's most important is the quality of the ideas that you're developing. You don't need to be a programmer or a visual artist to do this. You just need to lend this process your creativity and your insight into these topics. So your articulation of a game concept will do a few things. It will describe a transformative learning goal related to climate change and security. It will describe a game scenario, which describes the world your game is set in and the kinds of conflicts and situations that the player will confront. It will describe game mechanics, or what is sometimes called a game loop. These are the sort of nuts and bolts of how your game works at the level of play. And it might include visual examples of elements of your game or game artifacts. These might be a game board, it might be a character sheet or a character design. It could be game cards or game tokens. And ultimately, at the end of this process, you will describe your game concept in a 10-minute game pitch that you will make for panel agendas on June 26th. I want to stress that you have a lot of creative freedom in your approach so long as you have all of these core elements. Okay, depending on whether you have much experience playing games, especially climate-related games, you might want to consider some recent examples of successful climate games. And the example I'm going to talk about briefly is a game called Half-Earth Socialism. So Half-Earth Socialism is a planetary crisis planning game that integrates climate modeling with ecological and social systems to reflect the interconnected consequences of policy choices at a fairly high level, I should say. It was based on a book of the same name by Drew Pendergrass and Troy Vitesse. So what is Half-Life Socialism about? The player plans a global economy under climate constraints, and they need to balance human needs with biodiversity protection. So the game forces players to reckon with the trade-offs involved in maintaining political capital while developing resources and protecting biodiversity. It is by all accounts a very challenging game that presents players with difficult choices. And in highlighting those challenges, it aims to bring players into awareness of the complexity of the challenge of addressing climate change at a global scale. It's a free game. The address to play that is on the screen at the bottom there, just play.half.earth, which you can enter into your browser if you want to give it a try. But I've also added the link to that game in the text below this video, which you can click to play through. So what does the game look like? First, you set global policies. These can be research and infrastructure priorities that might affect economic planning, land use, technology development pathways. You allocate resource production to manage food and energy outputs within ecological boundaries. Then you monitor outcomes based on your choices regarding global temperature increase, population, the contentedness of the population, the biodiversity extinction rate, and the emission rate. And finally, you adjust your strategies You refine the policies that you've enacted to stabilize society and sustain ecosystems over time. And this is a kind of continuous balancing act. And this is basically the essence of the game loop. Now, this is fairly abstract, so I encourage you to play this game for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour or so, if you'd like to get a sense of what that game loop entails. And again, the link is below the video. So I'm going to get you started on your first tasking, which is coming up with a transformative goal for this game. I stress that this is an iterative process, and you may need to revisit or you revise that goal or scenario as you go through these workshops to ensure that it realizes the goal. Nothing you produce today is set in stone, and you have the option of revisiting anything that you've produced to improve upon. So before we get started, some key principles. AOD uses the Derby House principles for all game design and gameplay engagements. Derby House principles, in short, they're a set of rules for professional wargaming designed to foster inclusivity and diversity in the organization of key roles, and to proactively seek diverse inputs in the design and delivery of game content. From our perspective, diversity and inclusion are more than just words. They're hard and fast principles guiding how we facilitate our workshops and create a community that can support everyone who's in it. No one should ever feel excluded or less welcome because of gender, ethnicity, religion, disability, or background. Experience and social science have shown that diversity can generate better results in analysis, in insight, and in professional decision-making. And we work and live by those principles. So to get started, what I'd suggest you do is take some time as individuals to do some brainstorming. Try to come up with 3 possible answers to each of these prompts, although you can produce as many as you'd like. First, I'd recommend asking yourself what seems broken or unspoken about the climate change and security nexus, or the relationship between climate change and security. What do we feel we avoid addressing in defense and security planning, or in conversations about the relationship between defense, security, and climate change? Again, you can take a few minutes to think about that and write down a few potential answers. You might want to pause the video here. Now, flash forward to the year 2045. What new roles or missions are security and defense institutions being asked to perform because of climate change? What trade-offs might security and defense professionals face? What environmental limits collide with operational demands? These are just prompts, I stress. If you have other ideas about pressing issues related to climate change, security, and defense that don't fit under these prompts, feel free to include them. This is, again, it's a brainstorming session, and you can scope that activity as wide as you're comfortable with. Once you've come up with some potential answers to these prompts, I suggest you take some time as a group and discuss your answers. There are a number of ways to do this. You could start an email thread or a text thread over WhatsApp. You could use a Miro board, that's M-I-R-O, and it's a free tool. Again, I will add the link to that below the video. But however you approach it, I stress that it's probably best to have this discussion as a team. Once you've had some time to think about it and you've written down a few answers individually. Okay, so ideally you and your team have spent some time working through some general themes you've observed related to climate change and security. Now what we want you to do is spend some time discussing your transformative goal for your game. What do you want players to take away from the experience? So I'd suggest limiting your transformative goals to one specific goal. You might be tempted to stretch your game to reach several outcomes. In my view, this is likely to dilute the experience. Clarity simplicity is more likely to be impactful here. So think about this in terms of what is the one mindset or behavior you want to challenge or shift in the player. It's not bad advice to get you to focus on an impossible task. Make that transformative goal feel like it's just out of reach. The sense of impossibility will force innovative thinking and probably lead you to the kinds of transformations that are needed to actually change minds on the topic. Think about internal shifts, inner shifts, rather than just outward actions. The best transformative goals target relationships. They target values, identities, or ways of being, not just actions. Climate security is not really just a technical problem. It's an emotional, and it's an ethical, and it's a political problem as well. So the game should invite players to confront their own assumptions about power, about risk, about responsibility, and justice. You should test your goal for discomfort. Ask yourself, who would be uncomfortable playing a game about this? If everyone finds this game agreeable, it's probably not transformative. Climate threats often expose the brittleness of legacy systems, whether that's a command hierarchy, a logistical model, the definition of what a threat is or isn't. Ask yourself, what can your game reveal about how these structures may need to evolve? If it surfaces friction, whether that's about identity, it's about legacies, it's about responsibilities, you're probably on the right track. And lastly, we'd advise you to write your transformative goal in the following format. By the end of the game, players will. Some examples from a game jam we ran on culture change in the Canadian Armed Forces read, by the end of the game, players will recognize how hidden power dynamics shape decisions, relationships, and outcomes. And it will force players to consider how they might navigate or redistribute power more consciously. Another example from the same game jam. By the end of the game, players will experience how overlapping identities shape mission responses. And the player will be challenged to practice equity in both action and mindset. These are just sort of templated examples from a previous game jam. But the format I'd encourage you to repeat in your transformative goal. Okay, generally speaking, you're on the right track towards a compelling game concept if your transformative goal sounds more like a revelation than a bureaucratic statement. So my rule of thumb here would be to state your transformative goal in bold language that's likely to grab the attention of someone who might not know much about government or security. These are older examples, but think of the ending of Planet of the Apes or The Empire Strikes Back, and maybe take some inspiration from those endings. Both of those movies end with a revelation that kind of flips the script of what these films are ultimately about. For Planet of the Apes, it's that the movie has taken place on Earth all along, and humans destroyed their civilization. For Empire Strikes Back, it's that the hero, Luke Skywalker, is the son of the film's arch-villain, Darth Vader. And these revelations recast the meaning of everything the audience experienced up to that point. There are probably more recent examples that I'm overlooking here, but I'm a bit of a sucker for 70s and 80s nostalgia. But take inspiration from whatever inspires you. And once again, you don't need to follow that template to come up with a compelling concept. You don't need to necessarily flip the script in the model that I just gave you. But the essence of my advice here is don't be afraid to be bold and to challenge your audience. Your game is trying to break through to someone who may be a skeptic rather than appeal to the safety of diplomatic language. Okay, finally, developing your scenario. I want to stress that you have a lot of creative freedom in your approach to scenario design. So long as you have all of the game concept elements I described a few minutes ago. I stress the world is your oyster here. Your game doesn't have to be meticulously grounded in the real world. Because you're trying to immerse players in an experience rather than convince them of the realism and credibility of your scenario, your game scenario can take place more or less anywhere. It could take place on another planet or on an alternate Earth. It might take place in the distant past or the far future. I stress once again that you have a lot of creative freedom here, and I'd encourage you to indulge it. Why? Why am I encouraging you to do this? A scenario that is set in an unfamiliar setting is arguably better suited to reach skeptical players. By setting a game on a distant planet or in outer space, by removing familiar references to the real world, it's likely to be easier for a player to accept the message you're trying to convey to them. Imagine a game that aims to teach the significance of long-term thinking and future consequences over short-term reactive decision-making. For example, this kind of trade-off is a theme that often comes up when talking about climate change and security, but it's one that's often given short shrift in security discourse, where the alligator closest to the boat tends to dominate conversations. This kind of message is one which might be easier to convey to a climate skeptic, security-minded player if the game references refer to something that isn't already well known or familiar to them. Now, of course, you don't necessarily need to go into outer space to make a compelling game concept, but I want to remind you that if you have a climate skeptic as the target player of your game, which you should spend some time thinking about how you're going to try to convince them to give the game a try. If you're involved in this game jam, you're probably not the target audience for the game, because you don't need to be convinced of the importance of tackling climate change. A game that can use an imaginative setting to embed a powerful message is a good example of what we mean by stealth learning. A transformative game that uses an imaginative scenario like this is more likely to encourage players to be curious and in the process lower their defenses. And once again, that's what we mean by Trojan horsing. So how do you build your Trojan horse? We've got a few prompts to help you think that through. You can start by asking yourself, where does this world take place? And following that, how far from our world can we go in order to entice players to suspend disbelief? You can think about that in terms of the time horizon. Is it set in the present? Is it set in the past? Is it set in the future? You can think about geographical setting. Is it set in the global south? Is it set somewhere else on Earth, the Arctic, the Antarctic? Is it set on a parallel Earth with a different history or technology? Is it set on another planet? Optionally, you can add a twist here. Is this a post-Anthropocene, post-human Earth that's maybe ruled by AI or by nature or by some strange confluence between the two? Is this a world that's governed by water barons or oil barons? Once again, the world is your oyster here. And I encourage you to be bold and experimental as you work through these prompts. I'd also suggest thinking about a few prompts that will help you disrupt familiar climate framings and familiar climate narratives. What if climate security was not the main problem that the player needs to solve, but rather a background condition that shapes the context in which players make decisions and manage conflicts and trade-offs? Climate, in this sense, could simply be the setting. I referred to flooded cities in our own game, but you could use that. You could use desert hinterlands or borderlands. Climate could simply be a catalyst for conflict. It might be driving food riots. It might be driving mass migration. It might be a pressure. Climate change might be a pressure driving another set of issues. That could be political collapse. It could be, a takeover by computers or AI. Again, don't feel your scenario needs to answer every single one of these prompts. We've provided these to help you think through how to design a compelling scenario. You should build on and work with the answers that your team finds the most compelling. And finally, we have a kind of ad lib template for articulating your scenario for your game concept. You can describe your scenario using this template. So this is a world in which noun has described a change leading to describe a social impact. For example, this is a world in which global supply chains have fractured significantly due to repeated climate-induced disaster, leading to a rise in regional military alliances competing for scarce resources and logistical autonomy. Just an example. What this template aims to do is answer the who, what, where, when of your game concept in your game scenario, so that you can quickly communicate the key details of your game concept, and you can circle back to it as you're working through the subsequent stages of the workshop. Okay, so that's the end of part one. You can join me for part two shortly, where we will cover prototyping, game mechanics, and how to build a game loop. Thanks for listening. I'll see you shortly.